There you go. You made it.
Yes, I found it. So I appreciate you all being here. We'll see, we may get a few others, but every week I'm sending out an email reminder to a lot of people, and hopefully this will grow. We've just started doing this, Chuck, for about a month. So
Mhm.
we're growing
Was it weekly or monthly?
weekly. We call it Wednesday
Weekly.
Discovery.
That's a
Myself,
lot.
myself and Cassandra Wisdom, who's my partner, we started Awaken and Discover to have all kinds of explorations on our website. We have blogs on different information. And we decided to start doing this as part of, we're also part of the Tucson Paranormal Society that meets, well, we have a party once a month and we have other meetings. And the goal with that group is to have something just about every day. So Mondays, there's a conference call that you might want to speak on sometime. Tuesdays, we have a meeting for the leaders, the people kind of help organize it. Wednesdays, I started this, and we're still working on Thursdays. Fridays, we have a paranormal book club at the Barnes and Noble on at the Foothills Mall. And then Saturday, once a month, we have we call it a party, but it's basically the Tucson Paranormal Society and Awaken and Discover are all about, just like IONS, having a place to share and network ideas and information and experiences that other people might think are kind of weird. I knew Chuck a long time ago, several years ago. Well, first of all, he would have monthly meetings for people to share their near-death experiences, and so that they could, network that way. And I and a few other people tried to get one going in Spanish. It didn't quite go over, but the whole idea is the same as the Tucson Paranormal Society is, also sharing and networking. So I've asked David to share tonight his life because he's a very interesting person. We all come to our lives with, experiences, information, and so forth. And so I thought he would have a lot to share of interest to everyone. So David, you can start wherever you want to start.
Okay, well, I appreciate all of you being here. Kind had asked me to share my life with you, which is, it's as you know, well, do people really want to hear about my life? But she said she wanted me to talk about what I'd done and what I'm doing now. So, if you want to ask a question at any time, just speak up. I may not see you raise your hand or, hi, Aaron, how you doing? So I may not see you, raise your hand. So if you want to ask a question, just interrupt me, um, and I'll be
Ask
happy to stop. What's that?
everyone to mute yourself unless you have a question.
Yeah. So let me go to my screen here, and so everybody would like to think that they've had a interesting life or they've done something special. Um, I think I found in talking to a lot of people that everyone's had an interesting life. I think everybody has done something special in their life. And it's good to talk about it. That's why I encourage people to write books, to write memoirs and things about their life, because you discover a lot of things in doing that that you might not have thought about otherwise. But if I were to take any one section of what my life has been about, I could probably talk about it for a full hour. So we don't have time for that, of course. But I found that I can break my life down into like 7-year periods. It seems like almost every 7 years there's a new major theme going on. So right now I'm 75 years old, which means I'm near the end of an 11th cycle, which it has to do with reinventing myself. So that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years is reinventing who I am, who I was, and so forth. And I have several more years to go before I move on, to the happy hunting grounds or the land of milk and honey or whatever, which doesn't sound particularly good. So I may just bypass all that altogether and do something else. But I had my first psychic experience at about the age of 5 at my grandmother's funeral. All of my relatives were upset and crying, and I couldn't understand why everyone was so upset because I could see my grandmother standing right there in the center of the church. And she eventually came over and sat next to me and just explained that nobody else could see her. So we had a nice little chat, and then I went home as if it was really no big deal. And I've had events like that growing up. Um, I don't see the deceased. I don't see dead people all the time like you see in movies. I can't sit here and conjure up or talk to them anytime I want unless they are recently deceased. So at funerals, I do get direct contact. They'll come over and sit with me and talk. And they're usually very talkative because, like I said, no one else is there to talk to them. Um, when I was in my 40s, one of my best friends, who's a few years younger than me, actually passed away from liver cancer. And the same thing happened there. But when we went to bury his body, I saw him sitting on a limb of a tree right above where everybody was, shoveling the dirt into the grave. And he was watching. And I went over, gave him a smile, waved, and he pulled a leaf off of a tree and he just let it go. And it literally came down and landed right in the palm of my hand. And I still have that leaf, and I keep it with me just as a reminder of that day. Um, and then again, when I was in my 60s, another one of my best friends passed away, and we did a similar thing. So, what I found is that I can talk to those who have recently passed on, um, you know, but I have my own theories about that because the nutshell of it is that when people die, they don't hang around forever. For most people, after 3 or 4 months, they're gone. They've released their ego personality into what we call the Akashic Records. And the spirit that they are then moves on to the other realms, which some people might refer to as the angelic realms. But the truth is, they don't want to come back and talk to you 20 years later. Someone who's been dead for 100 years has no desire to come back and have a conversation with you. So I do have a problem with these people who say they can conjure up a spirit from another century, because chances are that a 100-year-old spirit has already reincarnated back to Earth. That this is a discussion we should have at another time. However, I do think that you might be able to pull some memories from the Akashic records and think that you're talking to an ancient spirit. Um, so as I was growing up, it was actually the perfect time because when I graduated from high school, it was the miraculous 1960s that were beginning. The hippies had replaced the beatniks in New York City. The war in Vietnam was going on. The peace and love movement was just starting, and the anti-war and anti-draft movements were going on. We still had the draft back then, and we had women's liberation was just beginning. The civil rights movement was just beginning. So it was just a really wonderful time. So one of the first books that I wrote was called "Story of a Hippie." And I go by the name of Anderson Andrews because that has to do with my Scottish heritage. But it's a fictional novel about what it was like to be coming of age during the 1960s, um, which is what I did. And in this book, a young man goes to New York University, but he also travels to the West Coast. He goes to Berkeley. He meets all the great personalities of the 1960s, such as Bob Dylan. He meets Timothy Leary, Jim Morrison, Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin. He gets involved with all these people all the way up through the Woodstock Festival, and then ultimately Altamont, which was the end of the peace and love movement. Um, so, what his dilemma is that when he first began getting involved with the hippies and the peace and love, he had committed himself to following the principles of peace and love. But then several years later, the movement became radical. His friends started fighting with the police. They started bombing public buildings, which were actual true events that happened with a group called the Weathermen. And they did terroristic things to get people to realize what being in an unjust war was really like. They were trying to bring the war in Vietnam home so people would go, oh, this is terrible. So he's faced with this dilemma. Do I keep my promise to be peaceful, or do I join my friends? And it's I think the book is very relevant to what's going on in the world today, because it's the same dilemma that a lot of young people are now facing. Um, the energy of the 60s is back right now. We're in a time of revolutionary energy. Um, People are being faced with, should I go out and demonstrate? How far should my protest go? It's like the January 6th thing. Should we actually try to take over Congress? How far am I willing to take my beliefs? So it's a great book to read, not only if you want to take a nostalgic look at what happened in the 60s, but also to get an idea of what's going on with the energy today. So Kana also wanted me to talk about my Peace Corps experience. So I'll jump there real quickly. Um, uh, after college, okay, I'll start with, I was basically raised a Methodist all the way through about the age of 17. But during my junior year of high school, I became interested in Eastern studies, mostly Buddhism. The first book I read was Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, which probably many of you have read. And I was only living like an hour away from New York City. So during the spring of my senior year, every Saturday morning, I would go to New York City by train and attend protest marches in Central Park. And eventually we would march down Fifth Avenue to Greenwich Village, and then I'd go home. But one night after getting there, someone told me about a Tibetan Lama who was holding classes in a room above a head shop that I think was called the Hungry Eye. So I started attending these talks with this old elderly Lama who was teaching us about the Tibetan Sutras. And I did that for the entire summer. And I was just fascinated with the whole thing. So when I went off to college in the fall, I took as many courses as I could on Eastern religion and culture. And by the time I graduated 4 years later, I wanted to travel the world, and I wanted to go to Buddhist countries, but I didn't have any money to do that. And the war in Vietnam was in full bloom, and the military draft was still going on. And I was a devout pacifist, so I put it out to the universe to make something happen that would allow me to do what I wanted to do and not get drafted. So, like magic, one afternoon, there was a Peace Corps desk that appeared at the student union. And I went over and talked to the person behind the desk and said I wanted to go to a Buddhist country. They said, well, you'd probably like to go to the country of Nepal. And I said, well, what do I need to get there? They said, well, we're looking for people to teach agriculture, but you need 2 years of agricultural experience. So I filled out the application, and I put down on there that when I was a kid, I spent my summers at my grandmother's farm in North Georgia. And during those months, I helped her pick vegetables and take care of the horse and the cow and feed the chickens. And I said, all that comes to 2 years of experience. Well, they accepted me as an agricultural teacher. And of course, when I got to my training group, I found that all the other people in my group, the other 30, they didn't have any more experience than I did. But a few months later, I found myself on the other side of the world with no idea what I was doing, because I was pretty much just a naive kid. I was interested in Buddhism, but I wanted to experience the culture firsthand, and that was pretty much the extent of it. This was 1971, one of the very early groups to go overseas with the Peace Corps. Um, the next 2 years, however, were just an incredible experience. I was totally immersed in the culture. And after 4 months of training in agriculture and learning enough Nepali to get by, then myself and the 30 other volunteers who I trained with were each placed in a village just completely alone. I was just driven there one day in a Jeep. We went through the woods, went all the way up to the base of the mountains, and I was dropped off at a tea shop. Said, okay, you're going to live there. And the guy drove back. That was pretty much it. And so the first year was pretty rough. And I wrote a book about my Peace Corps experience. It's actually called Peace Corps Nepal, A Search for Enlightenment. And it's a large book. It's about 500, it's almost 600 pages. So it's like an epic novel, but it's really good. Everyone who's ever read it just thinks it's a great book, because it's not like it's considered fiction, but it's also a true story. The hippie book is a fictional book. Um, that's not 100% true. I made up the story, but the one about the Peace Corps is all true. Um, but I still have it listed as fiction because I changed the names of a lot of people, and so when you change names and things like that, it doesn't become an autobiography anymore. Um, so let me see where I was here. So I was an agricultural advisor for an entire county that they call a panchayat. And the first year, like I said, was really rough. So I'm not going to go into all that other than just to say it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. It took a lot of readjusting and learning how to survive. It wasn't so much about saving them, it was more about learning to save yourself. Um, it was so tough, as a matter of fact, that half of the 30 guys that I went over with dropped out. Most of them dropped out within 6 months. The other dropped out in less than a year. So, but by the second year, I was able to get transferred up into the mountains, and I was all the way up near the Tibetan border, up high in the Himalayan mountains. And so there was a Chinese road that the Chinese had built going up to the border, and it was closed back then. Tibet was closed; you couldn't get into it, but you could take a bus all the way up to a little bridge that was guarded by Chinese guards. Um, I did I was able to get into Kathmandu relatively often, and there were some other outlying villages that had some electricity and running water. And I met a couple of Tibetan teachers, and one of them taught me Tibetan teachings in exchange for helping him with his English. The others, I attended some of their classes in Kathmandu. And I was also able to go to India several times, and I went to ashrams for intensive meditation courses where we would meditate for weeks. And I was, of course, doing my own meditation practice back in my village every day. So it was just an incredible experience for me. And when I came back from the Peace Corps 2 years later, I pretty much learned the Buddhist teachings. And I had learned to discipline my mind. And I was a completely different person than I was before. I mean, it was almost like a walk-in experience. And then I just wasn't the same person who I was when I went in earlier. So let me just take a quick pause there. I've got a lot more to go here. I'll try to get this wrapped up quickly, but does anyone have a question right now about anything or about the Peace Corps or anything like that?
What are Tibetan sutras? You mentioned that. Are those teachings or?
Yeah, so the sutras mean teachings.
Okay.
They just call them sutras. They're scriptures, basically.
Okay.
Hey, David, I just am curious. By the end of the first year, how many people were actually left? I mean, how many did you go with, and how many were left?
Well, there were several different programs going on. I was in agriculture.
Okay.
They had people who were laying water pipe. Um, they had school teachers. The women were mostly either school teachers or they were with birth control or health care. Now, the women all got placed in places where there was electricity and running water. The men got stuck in these places where, I mean, all we had was a river. I mean, uh, I try not to be gross or anything, but when you went to the bathroom, you had to go out to the rice paddy, and
Right.
and that would had lots of cobras in there. So you had to be you're kind of dodging cobras, while you're squatting down, um, and there wasn't anything to eat in the village level. All there was to eat was just rice. You got pounded rice for breakfast, which is kind of like what do they call it here in this country? It's
Sticky rice?
no,
No,
this is
it's kind of
dry.
it
It's
makes it
dry.
to kind of like a gruel, doesn't it?
Well,
Oh,
it's just pounded dry
Yeah.
rice.
Yeah.
I forget what it's called. Quaker Oats makes it or something.
Yeah.
Uh, puffed rice. It's kind of
Yeah.
like puffed rice. Then you had rice for lunch if you wanted light rice for dinner, and they had a little bit of dal, which was
okay.
just some lentils that were boiled in water, and this little chewy thing that they called sag. So when you go to an Indian restaurant, you'll see a sag aloo, which is spinach and potatoes. But this wasn't spinach. This is like some grubby thing that stuck to your teeth. that was pretty much the extent of what they had in the village. Now, when you went into Kathmandu, of course, they had everything there. You could, but it was expensive. You were paying American prices, and so like a Coca-Cola would cost you almost a dollar,
Yeah.
and we were only being paid $60 a month. That's all we got paid for being there. And so if you went into town and tried to have fun, you'd spend all your money. So you kind of got stuck staying in the village most of the time.
Did you live with the family?
I'm sorry.
Did you live on your own or with the family there?
Uh, in my first assignment, when I was down in the Terai, down by in the jungle, it was actually jungle is what they call it. It's just really heavy, dense forest, but they call it jungle because there was some wild animals in there and things like uh, hyenas and uh, could, we didn't have any tigers, but there were tigers nearby and rhinos and I don't know, a lot of things that would get you if you weren't careful. Um, but
If the cobras didn't get you.
yeah, the rhinos would. There's nothing worse than smoking a joint and going walking through the woods, for 2 hours and then thinking, oh my God, something's going to jump out and get you. But no, the first year I had a house. They gave me a house that I stayed in. It wasn't a big house, just a little made out of wood, and all the boards had spaces in them, about an inch in between the spaces. So when it rained, all the rain came in and you got soaked. Um, and then the second year, I didn't stay with the family, but I was in a house next to a family, and it was kind of like that. They were kind of like family. The guy's daughter came over and cooked my meals for me and everything, and so she would come in twice a day and cook everything. Yeah, Chuck.
Yeah, are you going to go into what I would call the Buddhist teaching and about consciousness?
Um, I'm going to get into the book I wrote called The New Book of the Dead, and I might be able to get into consciousness there if you like.
Yeah, and whether they're talking about karma and reincarnation or
Yeah,
whether
yeah. Okay, so go ahead. Do you have a question that you want to ask me?
well, it's a question of the philosophy of oneness versus, keep recycling as an individual with karma lessons that need to be addressed.
Um, okay. Can you make that an actual question though?
Well, just the difference from the science of consciousness point of view, the ultimate teaching, which is kind of where I'm at in my journey here, that we're all one, we've all got, mission, life plan. And from the Buddhist philosophy, as opposed to the Christian philosophy, where you got a one and done perspective, the Buddhists are about incarnation and karma. So it would be the contrast that you would perceive.
Well, I mean, personally, I think the Christians have it a little mixed up.
Yeah.
For someone to think that you only get one shot at this life, and that's it, or that a little baby comes in, is born for 3 minutes and dies, that's it. They're gonna wind up in some kind of purgatory or hell. I mean, that's just, I don't know. It's a very distorted view of what I think goes on. Um, yeah, I don't really want to get into Christianity too much. I just, for them, it's about if you don't accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, then you're fucked. And that excludes most of the world. I mean, the biggest religions in the world are Hinduism and Islam.
Yeah,
And
that's why I was looking for that
Christianity's
contrast.
down there is, I think, third. And so, yeah, it's pretty
Yeah, right.
elitist, kind of this elitist view that they have that, they're the only ones that are going to go to heaven.
All right.
So,
Maybe
but
this is the wrong forum for that question. All right,
well,
thanks.
consciousness is where you are right now. Your consciousness is what you focus on. Your consciousness. This is what I would say. You are consciousness. That's what you are deep inside. That's that watcher, that observer.
Yeah.
That's part of you. When you meditate, you learn about this observer, this watcher, this just kind of behind the scenes. That's your consciousness.
Yeah,
And you when you
the
whenever you focus.
consciousness, if I, just a point, conscious does not originate in the brain. It comes from the auric field and beyond,
Yeah,
and it moves through and out of the brain.
the brain is the organ, and I
Okay,
would even go so far that there's no memories or thoughts even in your brain. All your memories and all your thoughts exist outside of your brain. When you die, that brain dies. Consciousness
right,
continues to exist. So
exactly.
consciousness is what created your physical body, and consciousness is what's going to create your energy body when you cross over, when you go to the other side. You're still going to have a body,
Yeah,
but
so that's where the heart of my question was, is how
okay.
did you learn from in Nepal or from the Buddhists about their perspective versus you did have some Christian understanding when you went there?
Well, I don't think even the Buddhists know 100% what they're talking about, and they still have arguments between themselves. That's why you
That's
have the red. That's why you
precisely
have the
the
red
point.
hats and the yellow hats, as they have different viewpoints on what means what. Um,
Okay,
Let me just say this about uh, Buddhism in India originated with the Buddha. Now he set out for one reason. He it was never meant to be a religion. He set out to find out why people were unhappy. He went out at a young age. He said, "These people are not happy. I don't understand why. I want to find out why they're not happy." That was his whole purpose, to say, "Why are people so damn unhappy?" So he went out and he had his enlightenment, and he learned why people are unhappy. That's what his uh, Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path is all about. Why you're not happy in this life. That was it. It's a very mental thing. All right. Now, when Buddhism went north towards the Tibetan plateau, Nepal didn't exist then. But about 1100 A.D., a teacher called Padmasambhava went to the Tibetan area, and the people there worshipped the mountains. They worshipped the spirits of the mountains. They worshipped gods and goddesses, and they believed they were protected by the spirits of the mountain. So just as when the Christians were trying to convert the Christians, of course, tried to convert the pagans, but they had to keep the pagan holidays. In order to do that, they had to keep the pagan holidays to keep the pagans happy. Well, when Buddhism went north, they had to keep the spirits, to keep the local, the Bonpo religion, the spirit worship. They had to keep that. So in Tibetan Buddhism, it's much more spirit oriented. They do have gods and goddesses, and they do talk about the spirit world. They do talk a lot more about consciousness and death than they do when you're in India. When you're the India is called the Hinayana, which means the lesser path. It's just body and mind. When you get to the Tibetan, it's the Mahayana, which is about the emotional aspect and the spiritual aspect of a person. And it's much more complicated. And it gets into um, a lot of things they don't talk about when you're just doing the Hinayana down in India. So, and I think that's where a lot of the where they start to split on their beliefs. That's why you got the one lineage that believes this, and another lineage believes that.
yeah, thank you. That's great clarification. Really appreciate it.
Okay. All right, I'll move on real quick, and if you have a question, let me know. Um, all right, so okay. Um, so all right, I told you about the book. Um, and I told you that. So over my life, I have had a lot of experiences with death and dying. Um, I've had a lot of experiences learning about the spirit world. And when I was living in Pittsburgh in 2001, I took a graduate course at the University of Pittsburgh on the psychology of death and dying. And I just realized that I could have done a better job than they did. So that's why I wrote this book. It's called New Book of the Dead Transformation for the Afterlife. And of course, it comes from the original idea of the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And both of those books are very hard to read, especially if you don't have a background in Buddhism. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was written for Buddhists. It wasn't written for people who live in Western countries. So it used a lot of Buddhist terminology, and it's based on a lot of Buddhist beliefs. So I decided I'd write a book that people living in the West could understand. So it starts, and it's not a fictional novel, it's nonfiction. So it starts talking about the dying trajectory. The giant, everyone, we can sit here and say, well, the moment you're born, you're on your way to dying. But that's not the way the human mind thinks. People don't want to face the fact that you're on the way to death. Everybody thinks they're on the way to something in their future, but it's not death. So it's when the doctor tells you you've got 6 months to live. You go to the doctor, you've got this growth or this pain or that pain, and they say, well, we give you 6 months. That's called the dying trajectory. As you know, you're going to be dead pretty soon. And the psychology changes. Your whole mind starts changing because you're on your way out. This loneliness sets in, depression sets in. It's the same thing as the grief process. It's very similar to the grief process. You get angry, you go into denial, you go through all that stuff, and ultimately, finally, you maybe go reach acceptance. But I try to take people beyond acceptance. What I've done in this book is take you to the next stage, which is about basically learning to have a happy death. How to get through all your fears, get completely free of your fear of death, and to experience life to the very fullest, all the way to the end, because you're not going to die. It's the idea that death is a lie, that we've been lied to forever about death. It doesn't exist. We do not die. All we do is transform. We go from our body is energy. This is an energy body that we're already in. It's just very dense, so we call it physical. But you're going to go from this energy body to another energy body. You're not going to lose anything. And so what I've been taught is that when you cross over, you're going to be exactly the same as you were at the moment of your death. If you were a happy Methodist, when you cross over, you're still going to be a happy Methodist. If you're a jerk or an asshole, you're still going to be a jerk or an asshole. You're going to be exactly the same for a while. So you're in this area that we refer to as the near realm, which is because it's very close to Earth. And you at points there, you can still hear people talking about you and see them and see events. You get to see your funeral. You get to basically, the funeral is not so much for the people who are at the funeral. It's not so much for them. It's more about the dead person, to let them know that they've died, because there's lots of instances where someone might cross over and not even realize they're dead. They may still think they're alive. But once you see your body being burned or buried, then they suddenly realize, okay, I'm dead. And so events start happening while you're in the near realms. And we're not going to go into the whole thing just because we don't have enough time, but I would say that the afterlife is in stages. You have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So what I tell people is this: before you're born, when you're in your mother's womb, you start off as just a particle, a little atom, a little cell. And then it becomes 2 cells, and then 4 cells. Eventually, it starts to take a little form where you look like a fish. And then you start slowly becoming where you look like a human being, but you still have a tail. And then you start eventually becoming a baby, and then you're born. But you go through 7 or 8 stages before you even come out of your mother's womb. And then you come out and you're born. So you're a baby, you're an infant, and then you become a brat, and then you become a young adult, and then you become an adult, and then you become older, and then you eventually become elderly, and then you pass on. So even in life, same thing. You go through these 7 or 8 stages before you pass on. The afterlife is the same thing. You're not just going to be in the afterlife and it's going to be that way forever. It's not. It's going to go through stages. So you got stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. So you're right after death, stage 1, where you still have your ego personality. but that's going to get shed. That gets let go. And you do a lot of that shedding even when you're still alive, which I've talked to Aaron about this, about that's what I think that ghosts are apparitions and things that we call hauntings. There's just shed personality energy. It's not the actual spirit. Um, but anyway, eventually all that ego personality gets dumped and it goes into what I would consider the Akashic records because that's where all the memories can be found. But eventually you're going to move on to where you're this basically pure light of consciousness. And when you reach that point of pure light of consciousness, then eventually you'll go to the next stage, which prepares you for your next lifetime. Um, and that's all in my book. These are not, I'm not trying to convert anybody or trying to push my beliefs on anyone. It's just simply what I have been taught about the afterlife. Um, so then the last book I want to talk about uh, is one that's called The Activation. What if God were one of us? Okay, you have a question? Sure.
Well, Chuck had a question, and
Sure. Okay.
you want to ask that now, Chuck?
Yeah, are you familiar with the work of Dr. Michael Newton
No,
and Journey of Souls?
Yeah,
I have
Okay,
not read it.
okay,
that's the
because
best.
what you've defined basically is stage one, and you have four, he has six, but there's similarity there. But he has research, he has taken so many people through that process that his books really address that documentation too. So it might be interesting to compare his book to yours,
Okay.
his books, because he also talks about life between lives, where we have a soul plan created for this life. So that early part of talking about the cellular transformation and all, that's to have a physical apparatus, but the you is something larger than that.
I think that all of us we have what's called a divine plan. That's the term I would use. There is a divine plan that everyone here on earth is on for the same thing, and that is to live love. That we're here, that's called the ascension process. We're here to raise our vibrational frequency to the highest possible um, vibration that we can in order to where we are basically at the same frequency that we were when we were in spirit. We could go on with this for a long time, so I'm being cautious with what I say because I don't want to drag this out too long. But it's an experiment. It's an experiment in consciousness. Can we? We came in. We were at this sixth or seventh density as spirit. We came into physical form into third density, which is very fear based, and it's been that way for 12,000 years since the fall of Atlantis. And so now we're starting to move now into fourth density and fifth density. That's what people are going to be talking about this year. A lot of people are, because that's going to become mainstream conversation about going from third density to fourth density, going from fear based to love based. Can we create a world? Can we create a whole new earth or a new world based on love? What would that even look like? What would it look like? And can we even do it? That's the real experiment, is if we can even do it, because it's been tried before in other civilizations and other star systems. It's never been accomplished. So if we can do it, it's the first time it's ever been done. If we can't do it, game's over. We'll do it. We'll do it again somewhere else, some other time in another star system. But this will be the last Earth that we're going to have. So we can either create a new Earth based on love, or we won't. And there's no guilt there. If we don't make it, there's no guilt. It's surprising we've gotten as far as we have without blowing ourselves to bits. So we're at this pinnacle right now. We're at this pinnacle that we can either tilt this way or we can tilt that way. And there's a lot of good things happening in the world. There's a whole lot of really good things that don't make the news. A lot of people are really working at this to create a new Earth. And I think it can happen. But will it happen is still the question. So now, but you also come in with a personal agenda, a personal blueprint. So you have your overall plan to create love, but you also have your personal blueprint, which is you set that agenda before you were actually born, before you actually came into your mother's womb. You had this sort of personal blueprint agenda set up because you pick your parents, You pick the place where you're going to be born. You pick a lot of things in order to make your personal blueprint happen. But then basically the shit hits the fan the moment you're born, and a lot of that stuff starts falling apart. But at any point, you can pick up the pieces and get back on your journey, on your timeline that you originally set for yourself. But there's two timelines. There's your personal timeline, and then there's the one of can we pull this as a group? Because the ascension process is not an individual journey. The ascension process is a group journey. The ascension process is about all of us in the world coming together and creating a oneness, going back to that oneness of consciousness that we're all in together. A lot of people think ascension is a personal journey. It's not. It involves everyone in the world. So that's the experiment that we've got to get through. Um, so let me just go ahead and try to move on here real quick, so we
You were
don't
going
run
to
out of
mention,
time.
yep, another book. You were about to mention another
Oh,
book.
activation. Okay, um, okay, so after getting out of the Peace Corps, I was still a Buddhist, but I went to the University of Rhode Island, got my master's degree in public administration because I wanted to go back overseas and find a job with a refugee program. But I didn't find the job, so I took one on Long Island with a prison reform program sponsored by Cornell University. And it was a 2-year experimental program trying to help people find jobs when they got out of prison. Because employers don't want to hire people right out of prison. They want at least 5 years of being clean. So if you get out of prison, your chances of finding a job are pretty slim. Nobody wants to hire you. So this program was geared towards trying to change that. And once those 2 years were over, I got married, I started having children. It kind of got away from my Buddhist practice, you might say, and I became interested in other things. So I started taking courses in everything imaginable, like shamanism, hypnotherapy, past life regressions, New Age exorcisms, and channeling. So from about 1981 to 84, I went to just about every type of channel that existed. I was talking to archangels, people from other planets, the Pleiadians, the Ashtar Command, the Galactic Starfleet, Edgar Casey, Merlin, Egyptian high priestesses, hundreds. And I had all these entities that were coming through and telling me all these wonderful things about myself. So, but in 1984, I met a what I consider to be a pure channel who went by the name of Samuel. And I recognized him immediately from a past lifetime in Scotland. And I've been actually with Samuel for at least, well, it's been 37 years, I think, 37 or 38 years. And I'll be there in April with Samuel for the eclipse up in Indiana. But he taught me how to do channeling. And he said that someday I would be channeling myself. So for the next 10 or 12 years, I did start getting a lot of voices coming into my head, had a lot of different energies talking to me. I was getting a lot of information from the spirit world. Um, Actually, what's funny is I found that I could do this best when I was sitting in my hot tub at home with a glass of wine because you just get relaxed. You know, you're sitting in the hot tub at night, have a glass of wine, you just get totally relaxed, and then you open yourself up, and the energies would really come through the easiest that way. So in 1997, I went with Samuel to Egypt. And actually, we went to a lot of sacred sites around the world. We've been to Scotland, the Rocky Mountains in Canada. We went to Mexico a couple of times, Teotihuacan, and we went to Hawaii to open heart portals and doing energy grid work. We went to Australia to the sacred mountain of Uluru. But this particular trip to Egypt was about dying to our past and becoming someone different. He said the energy with the pyramids was dead, but we could bring that energy back to life by using our own energies. So from Cairo, we flew down to Luxor and we boarded a ship that took us up the Nile River to all of the sacred sites like Karnak and Valley of the Kings and Queens and many others. And the trip ended at the Temple of Abydos, which is dedicated to Osiris, god of the dead. And we had the whole temple to ourselves. They had arranged for the Egyptian government to clear out all the tourists, and we had the whole temple to just ourselves. So for about 30 minutes, we did toning inside the temple, which is perfectly set up to do toning. And about halfway through it, I could feel myself being embodied by some kind of spirit. And I was just being filled with incredible, powerful energy, like a 747 jet trying to land in a pair of shoes. And I found out later that it was an archangel who goes by the name of Raziel. Now, Raziel is not mentioned in the Christian Bible, but he comes up several times in the Hebrew Bibles. And he he told me later on, I mean, this is over years and years, but he eventually told me that we had worked together in many other lifetimes. And so for me, this was not really anything new. And I knew he was right because I felt totally comfortable having, basically sharing my body with him. So um, he basically isn't so much as a teacher, but he's just a friend. I just call him my angelic companion. But if I ever do have a question, I can ask him and we can talk about it. And he does give me answers if I ask for it. So we did talk about doing it publicly, and I did try doing some public channeling back. I forget, it was 2008 or nine, somewhere in there. But anyway, I didn't like it particularly. I didn't care for it. It might have been the audience, but I just decided that I would just continue doing it just myself rather than doing it publicly. Um, Now, backing up just a little bit. So when I was living in Long Island, I started a spiritual center for people to do talks and to do channeling, and it was also a healing center. And it ultimately led to my divorce. So after my kids were in college, I moved to Pittsburgh, and that's where I took the course on death and dying. I was kind of at a loss of what to do with my life. So in 2005, my parents, who lived in Panama City Beach, Florida, started asking me to come and help with their old age problems. So I asked Razel. One day we were just sharing a drink, basically, and yes, he likes to have a drink now and then, but because he can only taste it through me because he's embodied with me. And I know that sounds crazy or funny, but I want to remember that it was the priests of Europe who created the great wine vineyards in Europe. And they did that because angels like to drink. But anyway, so in our conversation, Raziel said, he said, Dave, he says, why don't you go down to Florida, help your parents, and start writing books? He says, there's a book I want to help you write. And it seems Raziel actually had written one of the first books ever called The Tetragrammaton, which according to him was basically about the relationship between angels and humans. It was sort of like the first Bible ever written. And according to, if you look it up, you'll find that in the Jewish Bible, they say that the Tetragrammaton was originally given to Adam, who then passed it on to Seth, and then he passed it down to Noah, and then the last recorded person to have it was King Solomon, and then supposedly it disappeared. No one knows where it is anymore. But according to Raziel, it's just been hidden. He says it won't be found again, until the world is at peace, because it's just he says it's just too damn dangerous. But anyway, he said if I went to Florida, that he would help me write a book called "What If God Were One of Us." And so I did. I packed up. I went to Florida to help my parents and started writing the book, which I it took many years to write it. And originally, it was like 500 pages. It's a great book, and everyone who ever read it has been touched by it. It literally changes lives. Now it's a fictional novel. It's not a nonfiction. It has characters, and I've made a lot of modifications to it over the years, so it's not exactly the same book it was. Because after Samuel read it, he wanted me to take some things out that he said were a little too scary for most people. Because Samuel doesn't believe in scaring people. He likes everything to be, happy, happy and cheerful. So it was over 500 pages long, and I wound up over time taking out about 200 pages to tone it down a bit. And Raziel agreed. He said it was still a life-changing book. Um, I had one lady whose husband she said was a real jerk, and she said that after he read the book that he became a nice person. So it can have that kind of effect on people. I had other people read it and say they were no longer afraid to die, no longer afraid of death. So now the book is called The Activation, with the subtitle, What If God Were One of Us? And I changed it for the reason I changed it because somebody came out with a, well, I won't go into all that, take up too much time. So anyway, um, I've written other books. I've written a total of 10 books altogether. But right now, most of those are being revised, so they're not available. Um, and I'm almost finished here. Let me see if I can wrap this up real quick. So my father passed away in 2008, mother passed away in 2017, and then I traveled around the United States, selling my books in metaphysical stores and wherever anybody else would let me talk. And in 2018, Hurricane Michael came through and pretty much destroyed Panama City. So I moved up to Wisconsin with my girlfriend and had a cabin in the woods near Lake Superior. And Rosdale told me that that was not where I was supposed to be. Um, both of my kids had gone to the University of Arizona, so I was already, in love with Tucson. And he suggested that I leave with the relationship I was in and go and move to Tucson, where he said I should start a publishing company and call it Transformational Publishing. So in 2001, my girlfriend and I had a peaceful breakup. She moved to Georgia to be with her mother, just as I had done back in 2005. And then I moved to Tucson to attend my daughter's wedding and had every intention of staying here after it was over. So shortly thereafter, transformational publishing officially began. So I started telling people, instead of saying that I was an author, I would tell them I was a book publisher, which was true because I'd been publishing my own books for the last 20 years. But it took me a while to really get going because I was still working on a lot of other projects. And then in February 23, I officially began with the Tucson Book Festival. And then throughout the whole year of 2023, I devoted most of my time to advertising, transformational publishing, and had enormous success. I've already helped several people write their books from scratch and gotten their books published. And in April, I'll have an office that I'm opening up on Speedway Boulevard, where I can meet new authors. And it has a podcast recording studio and a classroom. So I'll be very busy with helping people write their books, publishing their books, and marketing their books. And I also am working under another label called Arizona Book Publishing. So transformational publishing will be for spiritual and inspirational books, and Arizona Book Publishing will be for all the others. I'm also the editor of a magazine called Arizona Paranormal Times, which I do with the help of the Tucson Paranormal Society. And I'm also trying to set up two other businesses, the first being Arizona Paranormal Events for UFO hunts, ghost investigations, speakers, and field trips. And the other is a networking organization for psychics called the Arizona Psychic Association. So, with all that being said, I'm finally finished. Sorry it took up so much time. Any questions?
Well, first of all, there was no time limit, and you have a lot to share, and I'm really glad that you did. But yeah, now I'll open it up for any questions that anyone has or comments that anyone would like to say.
Good. uh, um, well, again, I appreciate all of you being here. Um, but you can reach me if you have any questions about anything. You can reach me at let me see, I've got like 18 different email addresses. Let me just
We have right here on the
oh
slide.
we got one there.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so you've got my email address and should have my phone number. So feel free to contact me if you have any questions about anything.
Well, that was a lot. And so how has all of this, now that you're getting to the age that you are, is there like an overview of how your philosophy is about yourself and life? Kind of, you went here and you went there and you did this and that.
It's not over yet.
Well, of course not. What,
I tell people I still have another 50 years to go.
oh yeah, you're going to be 125, yeah. So
Well, medical technology is changing so much. I mean, 10 years from now, they're going to have synthetic organs. You'll have 3D printer organs for people. 10 years from now, there's going to be no reason to die other than if you're in a traffic accident or you or something. I mean, people are going to be living a lot longer. Um, you don't want to live forever. We're meant to die. Dying's part of our experience. We're supposed to go through it, but there's nothing to say we have to die at 80 years old or 90 years old. There's no reason why we can't go to 125 or 150 and still have our consciousness, still have our wits about us. Um, I know in my case, really the only thing I've got wrong is I've got a bad back. I've got a herniated disc in my lower back. Um, and I've got a bad hip basically, but aside from my hip and my back, I'm fine. Um, and I think that can be corrected very easily. Uh, I've already stopped taking my pain pills. I haven't had a pain pill in 2 or 3 years. I just I do other things. So I'm actually in better shape physically than I was 10 years ago, if you want to know the truth.
Excellent.
Um,
You were talking about death and dying. Sometimes I wonder, well, I think about what would that be like when I cross over and will I say, oh, I'm dead now? Will I have
you,
that kind of consciousness that I can say, oh, now what? Be
it,
aware because so
it's
many of us
extreme.
become
It's, I
so.
always say this: it's extremely important that people be ready for death, that they
Mhm.
not be afraid of it. When you
Yeah,
die, you don't want to be scared. When you die, you want to be, I'm ready. I'm
yeah, yeah.
accepting. You want to, yeah, just because it's number one, it's not painful. Death is not painful. It's
Mhm.
nothing to be afraid of. You've done it hundreds, if not thousands of times before. You've done it so many times, you'll recognize it when the time comes. You go, oh, okay, I'm doing this again. Okay. It, Death is a beautiful thing. It's a fun. The body starts creating when you get near death. Your body starts putting out hallucinogenic hormones, and you basically do start hallucinating. But you're not in pain. You don't have pain. You start having visions instead. You have visions and you see things. But if your mind is clear, you won't see anything bad. If you've worked through your issues, if you've gotten through your traumas, if you've gotten all through all your fears, the visions that you're going to have will be these beautiful visions of the happy hunting grounds or the land of milk and honey or Jesus or Muhammad or whatever your belief system is, whatever your beliefs are, is what you're going to start seeing. Those are going to be your visions that you start seeing. But if you're scared and you're still traumatized from something that happened when you're 3 years old, and you're still having all these issues, that's what you're going to be seeing instead. That's what they call hell. That's where the whole idea of hell came from, was that you have these hellish visions that come from your own mind.
Mhm.
So you need to make sure you've cleared up all your issues before you go. But that's, people need to be accepting of death. Totally.
I have a friend who's just turned 75 yesterday, and he doesn't want to celebrate his birthday because it means he's getting too close to death. And I said, well, what do you think happens after you die? And are you afraid? And well, he didn't want to talk about it, but um, you know, when it's your turn, it's like, some people know when they're going to die. It's a good day to die, and they just leave. Uh, there
That's
was
right.
there was a movie I saw a long time ago with Robin Williams, and it actually called What Dreams May Come. Has
Right.
anyone ever seen that? And
Yeah.
that to me, what I got from that is like, I think it was his wife or someone just thought that she had to be in like a limbo or some kind of place. So she was. So it's like you say, whatever you think is going to happen, for a while, it's going to happen that way until you decide, oh, I don't have to do that. I don't have to be stuck in this place. But if you think that that's what happens when you die, then that's what happens. So,
Yep.
I would like to announce that next week, Erin will be our guest speaker. She's a healer and she's got a phenomenal amount of energy and experiences to share also. And as I said in the beginning, if you sign up, I think probably most of you have, for the newsletter at awakenanddiscover.com, you'll find out information about each week's speaker. And I've got some other people lined up that I think have interesting information. Chuck, did you want to say something?
Yeah, if I could announce, we are restarting that IANS group that you talked about in the
Oh,
beginning. We will meet the second Friday monthly at the Unity Church at one of the corner. Well, it's near Craycroft River.
Camino Blanco, right near Craycroft and River.
Yeah, Semina Blanco. I'm having a first meeting this month. It's just the third Friday, not the second. But normally will be scheduled on the second Friday, and this is an organizing meeting. So if anyone wants to be at the meeting, or you could get my email address, I could put it in the chat, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'll add you to the invitation. Where's the chat here?
What time do they meet, Chuck?
We're going to meet. I'm putting 6:30 on, but that's just sort of get together and get acquainted. Yeah, we'll certainly be trying to start midway or closer to 7. I'm not a big on having a extremely formal process, but we will have programs, and those will start on time. So open up around 6:30 and programs that we can share.
What are some of the focus of the different programs?
Well, one of the research projects I'm on right now is to introduce folks to a woman named Carol Lamb from the United Kingdom. And she is going to have, her work is going to be like, I'm going to say the equivalent of Raymond Moody, who published a book and coined this term near-death experience. Well, this is going up the next level, and it's going to talk about soul groups, life plans. Yeah, phenomenal. And she's got the demographics and research papers to back it up. So it's not just theory or somebody's experiences. The difference between an experience is knowing versus a belief system, which puts together our experiences and we formulate a worldview. And the true nature of an experience is you are transformed. You're not the same afterwards.
Yep.
And
Sounds
so
like you had some of those experiences.
yeah, we'll be going along that path. And the point of the group is sharing. Eventually may put it back online, but right now I need to have a team to help run it because I can't do it myself. There's no more misdefined word in English language than retired. And since I retired, I've never been busier.
You say don't retire, rewire.
Yeah, I'm totally energized with, the opportunities before us. And like David said, the next 2 years are going to be an opening of conscious like this planet has never seen before. And it's really empirical. Empirical means evidence-based. It's not just stories. The stories help contribute to empirical measures, but I liken it to astrophysics. Back in 1 to 200 AD, they had this guy named Ptolemy, spelled Ptoleme, and he had the theory that everything goes around the Earth. In about 1500 years later, come along Copernicus, who fed Galileo, and they put the data together to say, no, we think everything goes around the sun. Of course, that ran into the belief system fomented by the popes. Then they didn't like Galileo's stories, so they kind of put him in chains for a while. He recanted out of pressure, and then in the 1920s, scientists were still arguing about whether or not the end of the solar system, visible solar system, was the end of the universe. And then we got some rockets up in space and they got pictures that says, this can't be measured, the number of, pieces of the space kingdom. So that empirical growth, the data was really what forms carrying the new worldview to the next level. And we're doing that very same thing with the science of consciousness and the empirical data that demonstrates that. And that's where the studies like, well, I could go on and on.
Thank you, Chuck. That's great. That's I'll put out the word at that. I think some of you know that I had written the book, co-authored the book, The Big Picture of Life. And the two other co-authors, Gary Schwartz from the Consciousness Lab, a professor at the university, and Mark Pitstick from the Soul Proof group. I had actually met them at an afterlife conference for 2 or 3 years. They had an afterlife conference at Scottsdale, which was so convenient. And Chuck was always there with his T-shirt that said, on the back, it said, out of body, back in 15 minutes. And so that's where I started learning about a lot of this. And so the Big Picture of Life is a rendition of the Greater Reality Living that Gary and Mark had written, but written in a language and an approach.
And if I can
Meaningful.
interject real quick, well, how have they come with their soul phone project?
Well, I just got another message from Mark recently. They are still looking for money because they're using all kinds of volunteer people, but I think there's a millionaire who's maybe involved with the Skin Rocker Ranch who's offered to pay, I don't know, like $10 million or something to whoever can definitively produce scientific proof of life after death. So they're working on that, and their project is what they call the Soul Phone Project, where there would be like a keyboard that you could use to communicate with post-material persons, is what they call them. And then, well, right now, maybe looking at a switch that would be a yes or no, and then later on the keyboard. But when I kind of mentioned it sounds like a modern technology Ouija board, I didn't like that too much. So
I would say that the soul phone will not be sufficient proof of life after death, even if they do get some voices. But you know,
Right, because what do you
I
can't-
would just say the problem is the scientific method is third density,
Mm,
and
yeah.
life after death, you're talking sixth and seventh density. So you're not going to be able to prove life after death using the scientific method.
Well, from the study of near-death experiences, we can have veridical information. When a flatlined individual is resuscitated and then recounts data they should have no way of knowing from a physical apparatus, they're still the same body. So, and they can recall information collected while they were out of body, and the body wasn't working. That's scientific information that can be verified.
Well, let's wrap it up tonight, and thank you so much. So check the newsletter for information about Aaron. And after each of these discoveries, I write a blog about the talk, and also included in the blog is a link to the recording that that we have for this. So you can go back and view it again. You can send it to other people maybe who couldn't make it but might be interested in this topic. So thank you, David, for sharing. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and have a good night.
Thank you for
so
coming,
much.
guys. Nice to meet you all.
Very good.